know, we got Cleveland and Southfield and Detroit and people from all around the world. You in a box.
Girl, I know, and the reason I'm not saying,
tell us what to do.
Girl, I'm checking out everybody. They kicking in from all over the place. All right, now, you all know what time it is. It's getting there. Make those calls, make those texts, order those drinks. www.twistedtellers.org will get you anything you want. Now, before we get into the real action, there's somebody I'd like you to meet. She is the recreation programmer for the City of Southfield Parks and Recreation. Such a lovely sister. I want everybody to meet her. Storytellers all over the place. Meet Samantha Jenkins.
Hi, everybody. Welcome on behalf of Southfield Parks and Rec to our virtual Black History Month finale. We are so excited to welcome back the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers for the third year in a row. It truly has been an honor to be able to plan and provide Black History Month content for the community. Thank you so much to everybody who participated and made it possible. Please continue to check our Facebook, our website, or call for more information about upcoming programs and events. We have some exciting things coming up. I know that they have an exciting show planned for you tonight, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you so much. Thank the City of Southfield for inviting us to do this, like you said, for the third year in a row. And I'd also like to thank WC3D for your continued support of the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers. It means so much to us in pursuing our goals. Thank you.
Welcome to the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers. Here, there are no passwords, no velvet ropes, no locked doors or secret knocks. You need only be human to connect, heal, and transform. Before written language, stories were passed down from generation to generation through storytelling, song, and dance. Stories make us laugh and cry and grow. Stories can heal. They heal the storyteller and the story listener. Listening is a generosity, a human kindness, a revolutionary act. And at the highest level, listening is love. We are all unique and just a little bit twisted. We all have a story to tell. Now, are you ready to hear a secret?
My philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
All lessons learned of lessons learned. All bridges burned of bridges burned. This time I'll do things differently. This time I'll act immediately. All struggling of struggling. All giving of giving in.
This time I like to need you. I'm struggling, I'm struggling. I'm giving in, I'm giving in. This time I keep on, this time I keep away from you. This time I keep away from you.
Outstanding, young ladies, absolutely outstanding. The dance titled Good Trouble, choreographed by Christopher Huggins. The dancers, Sierra Green, Mayanna Holden, and Megan Wyndham. Outstanding job, ladies. Thank you so much. We've been missing the dance. We're gonna move right along. I know you don't want to keep hearing me talk. You came for stories. It is that time. I'd like to introduce to you our first storyteller. You know, we always introduce our storytellers with a question. This evening's question: what is your greatest source of pride? And she answered, I gotta read this one. Besides having a loving husband, children, and family, I am proud to carry the strength of the ancestors with me every day as I persevere towards excellence and greatness. Ladies and gentlemen, everybody in storytelling land, let's welcome Dr. Carolyn Carter.
My story began when I was 5 years old. Me and my sister and brother, we would spend summers in Black Bottom, Detroit, at my grandparents' house. And we would have such a good time. But we couldn't sit at the table with the ancestors and all of the relatives because they would talk and they didn't want kids around. But we would listen and learn about the relatives and the people who were no longer with us. We started calling them the dead people. But it wasn't until I got older that I realized they were called the ancestors. So my aunt wanted us to know who these people were. So she would take us upstairs in the attic and show us all of the artifacts that our ancestors had. We would climb this long staircase, and at the top of the case, there were two rooms. One room had old dusty furniture in it, and the other room had this big iron post bed, and it had a light bulb in the middle with a long string. So we would travel up those stairs, and we would go into that room, and she would pull out all of these items. I got to touch and feel the brush that my grandmother and great-grandmother used. I got to touch the flag that my great uncle had. He served in the war and he came home. So I got to see and feel all of those artifacts that were part of my ancestors. So I became curious. I wanted to know more about them. So as years passed by, we didn't spend summers there anymore. But my grandmother and my great-grandmother, yes, my great-grandmother was still living. And she would sit around the table and talk, and I would listen. That was my opportunity to learn about those ancestors. She would talk about growing up in the South. She was born in Caswell County, North Carolina. And the slave owner that owned her and her siblings and her parents moved the slaves from Caswell County, North Carolina to Haywood County, Brownsville, Tennessee. And so she talked about growing up in Tennessee and how they were a proud family and they would spend their Sundays at church all day. And she loved going to church and she loved going to school. And so I learned and I got to listen to her talk about those stories. But she was getting older. And so as I got more and more involved into finding out about the ancestors, one conversation we were having, we started talking about them, and she was the youngest of 21. And she only knew 13 of her siblings because the others were sold into slavery. And so I told her then, I said, I am going to find your other siblings. And she laughed and said, okay, some people really don't want to be found. But I said, okay, I'm going to find them anyway. So moving forward, she would die in 1993. She was 110 when she died. But I was on a quest. I was on a mission because I made a promise to her. So I got on the internet and I started searching for relatives of the last name Curry. And so I didn't get very far with that because it was hard because Ancestry wasn't available then. But lo and behold, I found a gentleman and he reached out to me and he said, do you know that the descendants from the Curry plantation owners still live in the house in Tennessee? And I was like, really? He said, I'm going to give you a phone number of someone, you should call her. And so I did. I called her and I told her who I was. And she said, well, you know, I don't live in the house, but my brother does. You should call him. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to give him a call. And so I picked up the phone and something stopped me. It took me 3 years to call him. And I think it was because I was apprehensive. I didn't know if he was going to receive me, if he was going to hang up on me. You know, sometime I would pick up the phone and call and I would hang up on it when I hear a voice, or I would attempt to call and then the phone would ring and I wouldn't give him a chance to answer. I would hang up. And so finally I got up enough nerve. I said, I made this promise to my great grandmother. I'm going to call. I just called. I picked up the phone. I called him on a Sunday afternoon and I was like, hello, my name is Carolyn Carter and I think your family on mine. So I didn't even really give him the opportunity to say anything. And he laughed. And that kind of was a relief for me. I'm like, okay, so maybe he's going to have some conversation with me. And so we talked about the plantation owners, but he really couldn't share very much from me. And I'm like, okay, well, he don't know very much. And so we lost touch. And then another few years went by and I was on social media and I'm connected with his sister. And she said, we've spoken before. And I didn't remember that, but I was like, okay. So I called her, we text each other and I called her. And so I commenced to telling her my story about who my great grandparents were and who her parents were and who my great grandmother's parents were. And she stopped and she got very emotional on the phone. And I was looking at the phone like, what's she so upset about? I'm the one who my ancestors were owned by yours. And so then I said, you know what, this is my opportunity to really get to know what I can find about a slave owner. So I am going to allow her to go through her emotional challenge. And then I'm going to bring it back around and we're going to have some conversation. So we did. And we talked for about 2 or 3 years and our relationship kind of evolved and we would share information and I would share information with her. So fast forward to 2020, my mother died from COVID. And we had been in the house for many, many days. And I told my husband, I want to go to Tennessee to visit our cousins. But when I'm down there, I'm going to go to the plantation because she invited me. And so he was like, for real? I was like, yeah, we're going to go down there. And so when we got to Tennessee, I called, I said, we're coming to Tennessee. I'm coming to visit you. And she was like, okay, all right, come on down. And so we got to Tennessee. We were driving up the highway towards Brownville, Tennessee. And then it became real for me. I'm like, okay, I'm going to really see these people now. And so we got to the gate of the Curry Jarrett farm. They had a big plaque out front that said Curry Jarrett, 1832. So I knew when the plantation was built. And so we pulled up and I was sitting there and I'm thinking, I wasn't nervous, but I was anxious because we were in the midst of COVID. And my husband and I were wearing masks, but they weren't. And so I gathered all my stuff because I had collected all these documents that I wanted to share with them. And she was waiting for me at the gate. And I looked out the window of the car, there was a big white house. And I said, okay, so that's the big house. And so she was standing there and she had the biggest smile on her face. And she's a little over 4 feet tall. And so when I got out of the car, I had all my bags and all my documents. And she was like, are you okay? Do you need to sit down? You need a drink? Do you need a chair? And I was like, I'm fine. I was like, did she think I was going to pass out? Or maybe I should have worn my Black Lives Matter t-shirt. Did she think I was going to beat her up? Or did she think I don't know what she thought I was going to do. So anyway, I was like, okay, I'm fine. So I came into the gate and she greeted me. And then her brother, who I had spoken to, came out of the house. And he greeted me and my husband, and we commenced to walking around the house. And they got to the side of the house, and it was a big chimney. They said, well, this chimney was built when the house was built in 1832. And I'm like, wow, that was before Sally Hemings died. Remember, she was on the plantation with Thomas Jefferson. I wonder what she was doing at that time. And he said, well, it was rebuilt in 1863. And I was like, okay, so that's before emancipation. So I'm wondering, did my ancestors build that? Because they had cotton and they had lumber on their plantation. So they walked us to the back of the house. And he said, I want you to look south 1.5 miles, and that will tell you how much land we had during that time. And I was like, wow. When I did my research, I only found about 50 slaves. So they had to have way more than that. And so he said, well, we're going to go to the furthest back to the back of the house, and we're going to go over to the family cemetery. And I thought, okay, well, that all the family has to be buried there, including mine. And so when we got over to the headstones and I saw the names of the plantation owner and his wife and their children, and I said, well, where are the Black people buried? And so my husband gave me the evil eye, like, why are you asking that? And he was like, well, we don't know where they buried. It's a grassy area over there on the side somewhere. And maybe it's over there. We don't know where the Black people are buried. And I was like, but I'm going to die from here. This is where I'm going to be buried. I was like, oh, okay. He said, well, let me show you our cotton field. And I was like, okay. I said, well, who was harvesting your cotton? He said, well, I said, is it a Black kid, Black boy? And he said, no. It's a child that we know when we were young. He grew up with us. He comes and helps us harvest the cotton. And I was like, okay. My husband gave me the evil eye again, like, why are you asking that? I'm saying to myself, I may not never get back here to see these people again. I want to ask them everything that I can think of asking them. And so he said, well, why don't you guys come on in the house and I can show you guys around? And so I was like, okay. Even though I was a little hesitant, we went inside and you could tell the house, the back of the house had an addition that was built after 1835, but the front of the house was its original house from 1832. And it has this big Paul Bunyan sized bed in the room. He said that bed had only been moved one time. So we were standing there talking, and I was like, okay, now I'm going to pull out all of my documents and all of my papers and everything that I have, that I've researched, and I'm going to share it with them. So I commenced to pulling out documents and showing census records and land records and deed records. And I actually had the will inventory from the slave owners, my direct slave owner's father, when they left North Carolina, that listed the slaves. And it was one particular slave in there. Her name was Frances. And he said, to my daughter, Mary, I leave a yellow girl named Frances. And so I asked him, I was like, see, what do you think this meant? And so she said, well, that probably meant that they were a child of the plantation. I was like, absolutely right. So that, that makes us kin, right? Because we had already connected through DNA. And so her brother started looking through the paperwork, and he noticed that I had some information, because I said my father's side family also came from Tennessee. They're Halliburtons. And he stopped in his track. He was like, wait, whoa now. I am not only a Curry, I am a Halliburton too. We are cousins twice. And we all just fell out laughing. I was like, oh my God. He had not taken the DNA test, but he knew everything about the Halliburton side of the family. So it was very interesting. My husband was cracking up. He was like, you got a double cousin. And so I was like, yes. And so we commenced to reading through the information and sharing information and talking about the ancestors. And they said, well, Big Mama said, I was like, oh, they had a Big Mama too. And so they were talking about how they grew up, but they couldn't share any information about the slave owners. I was like, you don't have a picture, you know nothing about them. They couldn't tell me any stories. And so what I did was I gave them the information that I had researched about him. I left that with them as we were leaving. I said, well, we're going to come back. We're going to come back and visit. I'm going to bring everybody with me. And they were like, come on, you can come on back and visit us again. So we were like, okay. So we were driving. She called me on the phone because right before we left, another person showed up. she came and she introduced herself and she said hello. And she looked at us like really, really strange. But, you know, she was very polite. So we got in the car and she called me she called me on the phone and she said, I got to tell you something funny, because we had started talking and we were kind of cordial with each other. She said, our cousin came in the house and she said, y'all didn't tell me that they were Black. And so we just fell out laughing. We was like, yeah, tell her we're cousins too. We're going to come back and visit. So I say all that to say that, you know, my ancestors are their ancestors. These are my family. We are blood. So now I don't have to call them the slave-only descendants. These are my cousins. We are connected through blood, and there's nothing that we can do about it. So, you know, I'm very proud of that heritage. I'm proud to share that heritage with my children and proud that I'm able to conduct this research. And I'm also proud that I kept the promise to my great-grandmother that I would continue that search in finding her family and her ancestors and everyone else that's connected to us. So I am the hopes and dreams of my ancestors. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. That was absolutely wonderful. It must be nice to be able to walk back into history. I want to do that. All right, everybody. We pulled out all the big guns for you tonight. So they all showed up and they're getting ready to continue showing out. Our next storyteller, we asked the same question. What is your most prideful moment? He answered by saying, wow, that's a tough question. I am well raised. I had good parents who taught me something about goodness, kindness, and selflessness. I am proud of my children, both biological and experimental. I have good friends. I don't think I could ever reduce my most prideful thing to just one thing. Everyone in storytelling land, let's welcome Dwight Stackhouse.
Good evening. There are many of us here on the planet. We cover the human rainbow, red, yellow, black, white, the ever increasing brown. I once had a friend I want to tell you about who fell under the red banner, but he could, and for most of his life he did, pass for white. He was steeped in pride and overwhelmed by prejudice. He had sad eyes, deep, bottomless eyes. Even when he smiled, his eyes were sad. They dominated his countenance. You could rewind his life if you gazed long enough into his eyes. I met him when we were young men in our 20s and both suffering in the ordinary ways that life demanded. We were friends for 10 years and we worked together in retail. You know how that is, or was. Lots of long hours, lots of downtime, which gave us lots of time to talk. He was with me when I broke down publicly, crying so desperately that they had to call an ambulance, when it finally dawned on me that I had left my children. He was handsome, and in some ways he was very proud of his native status, but in other ways, many other ways, he was absolutely ashamed of being who he was. The world has the power to do that, make you hate yourself, your black, your yellow, your red, your brown self. He tried to live an impossible imitation of life. Having been born on a reservation, the ways of his people were very well known to him and satisfying enough They were, after all, members of the Anishinaabe, or said, when translated, the original people. Now, that fact was a source of great pride in his family, but it was only discussed with his drunken uncles during colloquies. And these men could find no way to jibe that noble history with their current condition, being controlled and humiliated by white men who confined them to reservations. Now, however true or false the stereotype is of the Native American's inability to hold his liquor, alcohol was a problem in his family. There on the reservation, a place he almost never spoke of, he learned that he was less than other humans. This humiliation, this heritable knowledge led him to follow in his uncle's moccasins. Like them, he began drinking early in life and was a full-blown alcoholic by the age of 14. When we went to lunch, his lunch was a 6-pack of beer. He was ridiculed on the plantation, or I should say on the reservation, because of his European appearance. His hair, which was as black as space itself, was the only physical trait he had that suggested his native heritage. He was teased on the reservation, called a paleface. And one day when he and his family left the compound to buy shoes that they couldn't get on the reservation, he got separated from his uncles who had found their way to the only bar in town that would serve them. So he was lost on the street and he meandered over to the wrong side of town, where he had to listen to the locals ridicule him and his kin, calling them Injuns and Wahoos, Redskins, and worse. But it was clear that they didn't see him as a Native American. And this gave him the idea that he could leave the pain of his life on the reservation and enter the world he so envied. At 16, he left home. He had very little formal education, but he was very accomplished at mimicry and practiced in the ways of white men, learning to speak and walk like them. In the age of polyester, he was awash in it. All those hideous plaids and bell-bottoms. He wore wing-tip shoes and the other classic garb of the white boys of that era. He became a follower, a sycophant. The intention was simply to learn the ways of white men, to blend in, but it morphed into the habits of a bootlicker. At some point, he lost himself. It was imperceptible at first. He had become simply an affectation. Self-loathing followed him like he followed his oppressors, the very people who heaped all manner of prejudice upon him and his family. He could not help himself. He wanted what he believed them to have. He wanted to be them, and his appearance allowed that fantasy to flourish. But visions of his former life would not release him. The memory of the shanty in which he was born and raised, the despair of pervasive ugliness, drunkenness, and drug abuse haunted him. His family was still there. They were like nightmares swirling in his head. He decided to cloak the nightmares with the purchase of a house in the suburbs where no natives were welcome. He surrounded himself by his heroes, and it gave him real satisfaction. He littered his life with the accoutrements of his idols. He actually had a white picket fence built. It was like a totem for him. His handsome affability allowed him to acquire things, baubles he would show off and brag about. He found a white woman to marry who bristled watching him cower and defer to everyone else. She simply couldn't understand it until, in the throes of one of his drunken bouts, he confessed his gentry to his friends, and in the presence of his wife, who was hearing it for the first time. She was mortified. "So you're a damned Indian?" she said. She said this with the surprise of hearing something disgusting, grotesque, and inappropriate. The crowd, his friends, as sloshed as he was, joined in. "Hey, Darlene, you married a goddamn redskin. Well, I'll be damned. We're hanging out with Chief Wahoo." And the laughter began. And it would not end. They started calling him Chief, and they shared this gossip with everyone in their circle. Darlene, his wife, became distant, feeling diminished and deceived. His good looks, his acquisitions meant nothing. She stopped sharing herself with him, saying, "At least I didn't get pregnant, thank God." When he sobered up, he did not remember the confession, but he could not escape the derision it fomented. "I hate these motherfuckers," he told me, downing the fourth beer during our 1-hour lunch. "They're not better than me. I'm as good as any of these white bastards. I got as much money as they do. My house is as nice as theirs. Who the fuck do they think they are? I hate these assholes. I swear I'm gonna shoot somebody." This is the 70s, and that statement was just hyperbole back then. And I was not alarmed by it. But there was madness on his face. There was anger in those sad eyes, compounded by the alcohol. He had told me he was an Indian, and he was taken by my fascination of the culture. And I was humbled in my ignorance. We bonded in this way, as I, a black man in America, had anger of my own. This gave him permission to ramble, or more precisely, to boil. His drunkenness became a constant. He wasn't simply an alcoholic. He was a constant drunk. He was drunk at 8 a.m. and he seethed all of the time. He could find no peace. It wasn't long before his wife left him. He was fired from his job. His polyester haberdashery was retired, and he began wearing tattered jeans and dirty t-shirts. He lost his house. When I last saw him, he was finally dark of skin, dark in the way that homelessness provides one with color. Even his teeth had gone brown. He barely recognized me. That is to say, he could not find words intelligible enough for me to know it. I missed my friend. I missed him for years. And then I heard, some years later, that he went into the forest with a case of Budweiser and a shotgun. And he sat down on one of the fallen trees in the forest and started tossing those Budweisers down. With 3 left in the case, he decided indeed it was time to shoot somebody. He put the rifle to his chin and pulled the trigger. The pellets exited the barrel of the rifle in his cranium. He was found the next day by white hunters, and there was no sadness in his eyes. It had transferred to mine. His pride was deep and wide. The prejudice could not be surmounted. I think often about my friend, and I think often about the twisted power of pride and prejudice. Thank you.
Dwight Stackhouse, you never let us down. Powerful story, powerful. Thank you so much. Well, now we're coming upon time for me to do our little commercial break. You know, one of our favorite twisted storyteller family members always comes with a fabulous smile to update us on what's going on with our vendors and anything else that might be happening within the Twisted Storyteller family. Everybody, let's welcome Monica Scholler.
Hi, everyone. We hope you're enjoying all the stories. We're so excited to have you join us with Southfield Parks and Rec. So, you know, the Twisted Storytellers, we support small businesses. And so we wanted to show a feature of 4 different businesses that are Black owned. So first up, we have designer Sienna Treese and her newly launched Nudes collection. So I love this collection because it focuses on 6 different bodycon dresses that range in shades. You know, Black people come in a range of beautiful shades. So these 6 dresses cover the range of different nude shades that fit your skin tone. And what I really love about this collection is that she's named these dresses after iconic Black women like Michelle Obama and Serena Williams and Dorothy Dandridge. It is just incredible, so well made. Sienna is just a powerhouse. You're going to hear more from her. And to learn more about her, you can check out her website at siennatreese.com. Also, we have one of my favorites, delicious treat, Motor City Spreads. This company features jams and jellies, and they're so delicious, guys. They've got flavors like apple pie and orange. One of my favorites was jalapeno because I'm a spicy girl. I like a little spice in my life. So go and check them out. They can do even little miniature jars. If you have a baby shower or some type of event, they can work with you to create different things and different themes. They are awesome. You're going to love the products. You get the stamp of approval right here from me. So check out their Facebook page at facebook.com/MCSpreads. Shanita Richards is the owner, and you'll just love her and everything she has to offer. Up next, we have Soul 3 Avenue. So this company makes garments, they make accessories to go with those garments. So if you're looking for something for a night on the town, or if you're just chilling, you want to do whatever you want to do with your own vibe, they got you covered. They've got t-shirts and all types of accessories to go with them that I think you will really love. I love them. The owner, Valencia Sipes, is such a joy. She's a longtime friend of the Twisted Storytellers family, and we just love her so much. So we hope you go and support her. Go to soul3avenue.com, and that's soul spelled S-O-L, the number 3, avenue.com. And then last but not least, guys, this is going to blow your mind. So I know you've heard of essential oils and maybe essential oil diffusers. Well, this young man, Dominic Heron, founded a company, Organic Serenity Lockets. What I love about this is that it's essential oil diffusing jewelry. Yes, he makes lockets and bracelets and different pieces where you can put a drop of oil inside the jewelry, and then you can walk around. You've got your aromatherapy. Let me show you. I actually have one here. He made one for me for my nonprofit. Actually, one of my friends had it made for me, and I cried when I first saw it. They took my logo and actually created this design just for me. So Dominic can take your ideas and bring them to life. And there's, like I said, a little felt pad inside. You can put your favorite essential oil. And now you've got your aromatherapy. You can give it as gifts. You can wear it for yourself. He'll have you looking good, smelling good, feeling good. It's just so incredible. And we're so proud of Dominic and all that he's doing. So to check him out, you can go to organic.com, and that's spelled ORGANNECK.com. Speaking of websites, check us out, the Twisted Storytellers. You can visit us at twistedtellers.org, and we've got so much information there, so much content. Past stories, because that's what we do, is storytelling. So you can see our YouTube channel on there. There's information on how you can become a storyteller or how you can become a vendor. There's information on us, the people who run all the things behind the scenes. So go and check us out. Also, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you love the stories tonight, give us a little tip. Just click on that donate button. We will surely appreciate you for it, and we will put that tip to good use. So that's enough from us. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you go out and support these small businesses and enjoy the rest of the show. We'll see you later for the after party. Bye.
Monica, you are just so wonderful. And I'm never going to have any money because you just keep showing me things to buy and to eat and to just indulge in. But that's okay. I'll keep spending because the things are wonderful and we have to support one another. Okay, it's time for music. And I've got a wonderful, wonderful interlude for you this evening. Everybody in storytelling land, welcome the urban violinist, Kym Brady. Kym, shame on you showing out like that. I closed my eyes and felt like I was transported back to some of the faraway places that I visited in my lifetime. That was wonderful, young sister. Yes, awesome. Whew. Clutch the pearls. All right, we're going to move right along. We're going to go back to story time. Coming up next, we ask the question, what is your greatest source of pride? And our next storyteller responded, I take pride in being part of a growing movement of white people who are finally waking up. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Frank Joyce.
As I appear before you today, I'm speaking as a proud member of the Grosse Pointe Antifa 3. I've lived in Grosse Pointe Park since 1989. Since I mostly hated the Grosse Pointes and all they stood there for, moving there was not an easy decision. I'm not sorry, though. It's been quite a ride for the last 30 years. All over the world, when I say I'm from Grosse Pointe, many people say, Grosse Pointe blank. That was a John Cusack movie, something of an underground classic. But that's not really what Grosse Pointe is known for. The Grosse Pointes are mostly famous for WASPdom. That's White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, for those who don't know that acronym. Sure, all of our big cities have rich white suburbs, but the Pointes took it next level, and they still do. All white, all the time. Jews are not welcome either, or really even Catholics too much. Purity, that's what the Pointes are all about. People of a certain age know that the Grosse Pointe Realtors Association got busted for having a point system. It was a secret code that assigned scores for things like being Jewish or Greek. Many Black people alive today can tell us stories about their parents or grandparents who were servants to the Grosse Pointe rich and what they had to put up with and still has to put up with. It wasn't that long ago that cops in Grosse Pointe Park had an acronym they used on the police radio, NOMAD, N-O-M-A-D, N-word on Mack Avenue after dark. As recently as 1984, the cover of the high school yearbook included a Confederate flag. The latest news has been about my friend and neighbor, Jadonna Dingus. She was confronted with a KKK poster that her white neighbor put in his window where she couldn't miss it. Maybe at this point you're wondering, so Mr. Smarty Pants woke white guy, this is the place you decided to move in 1989? Explain that. Here's what happened. That year, I was living on the east side of Detroit. Somewhat suddenly, I became the single parent of my son, Joe, age 12. Like any parent, the quality of the school zoomed to the top of my list of priorities. Grosse Pointe has excellent public schools. Basically, that's what happened. As we expected, being in the Grosse Pointe schools was difficult for Joe. Why? Because he is biracial. He had to put up with a lot of nonsense. I leave those stories for him to tell one day, except to say that at least he did get an education that helped him succeed. Some of that had to do with reading, writing, and arithmetic, but a lot had to do with learning the ways of rich white people. That's a good skill to have, especially if you're in the concert and music business, which Joe is. Many people don't know that there are pockets in the Pointes where houses are affordable. One of them is in Grosse Pointe Park. It's called the Cabbage Patch. For the real Grosse Pointers, that is, rich ones who live in big houses, Cabbage Patch is a derogatory term. That's because the neighborhood's right on the border with Detroit. It has a lot of renters, and it's poor by Grosse Pointe standards. Our house, though, is a 100-year-old gem. It's been very, very good to us over the years. And it established our residency, allowing Joe to attend Grosse Pointe Public Schools. These days, it's fashionable to throw around phrases like institutional racism, systemic racism. Most white people don't actually grasp what that means or how it works or how they participate in it. By all rights, Grosse Pointe should be flooded nowadays with sociologists and historians and academics. It's like when Charles Darwin wanted to study the origin of the species, he went to Galapagos. If you want to seriously study the white supremacy of 2021, you would come to the Grosse Pointes. For the past perspective, you could dig into what happened when the powerful white men decided that too many Black people were going to the movies at the Esquire Theater on Jefferson. They harassed the owners and customers until they figured out how to force it out of business. Then some civic leaders, in the name of philanthropy, built 2 full-blown movie theaters inside of Windmill Point Park. They show first-run films. Guess what? It's for residents only. Racial problem solved. Pretty much the same thing happened out in Grosse Pointe Farms on Mack Avenue, not far from 8 Mile Road. By the way, in the Grosse Pointe, 8 Mile has a different name. 8 Mile is too D Class A. So it's called Vernier Drive. Just like Jefferson turns into Lake Point when you get to the big fancy houses on the waterfront. I don't know why, but Black people love Red Lobster. One theory is it's about the biscuits or the red velvet cupcakes. Whenever I've been there, though, it's like they have some sort of all people are welcome vibe. Exactly the opposite of what the Grosse Pointes are going for. It was pretty much the same story. Too many Black people were going to that Red Lobster. They harassed the place out of business and put a Farmer Jack there instead. It's now a Kroger store. The cover story was the same. It was all about economic development and such. Even though anti-racist work wasn't why I moved to the Pointes, once I got there, that's what I wound up doing. That did not come out of nowhere. Way back in 1966, I helped form an organization called People Against Racism. I believe then and now that white anti-racists should work in white communities. I don't mean that fighting racism was what I did all the time. I had a demanding job. I was parenting, normal daily life stuff to do. But racial issues come up in the Pointes all the time. One of them has been a recurring theme ever since I've been there. Walls, barriers, fences. It's as Grosse Pointe as it gets. All along Alter and Mack Avenue, there are barriers, walls, fences on the Grosse Pointe Park side of the street. Some of them have been there so long you would never notice them. They look as natural as can be. Brick walls, chain link fences, attractive berms, streets that suddenly end short of making it all the way to the cross street. They have always been controversial. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, is that there is also a long history in the Pointes of residents who are against racism. They're kind of like the white abolitionists before the Civil War, or the white people who helped the Underground Railroad. In 1963, then Governor George Romney marched in a fair housing march in Grosse Pointe, for crying out loud. In March of 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was invited to give what turned out to be one of his last speeches at Grosse Pointe South High School. There's now a historical marker about that speech that went up just a few weeks ago. Back to walls, fences, and barriers. One of the first was at the intersection of Corte and Alter Road. There was a racial justice group in the Pointes then called the Racial Justice Center. They pointed out that the street closing was sending a "you are not welcome" message to Detroiters, That would be Black people who lived on the other side of Alta Road. It's got nothing to do with race, the shock power brokers said then, just like they do now. One thing I've noticed over the years, white people are downright perfect at knowing what is not racial, which is strange since they never seem to know what is racial. So how can they tell the difference? It's not race at all, they said. No. It's about traffic control. Traffic control, my ass. Along Cadieux Road, there are lots of very busy cross streets between White Grosse Pointe Park and White Grosse Pointe City. No one ever proposed putting up a barrier there, let alone actually erecting one. Since the wall at Corte Street went up many years ago, others have followed. One of them led to my meeting Greg Donnelly. He is one of the Grosse Pointe Antifa 3. The other one, Bianca Garcia, will enter the picture in a minute. The crony capitalists who've controlled Grosse Pointe Park since forever decided they wanted to shut down Kercheval at Alta. They did some test runs. They used construction projects and other decoy operations. Satisfied with the results, one day in 2015, they shut the damn street down. Kercheval's not just any street. Along with Jefferson and Mack, it's one of 3 east-west major thoroughfares. Kercheval's especially important because it leads into the park's major business district. Protest ensued from residents and business owners. Greg and I found ourselves at many demonstrations and city council meetings. We soon found out we also lived less than a block apart in the Cabbage Patch. We became friends and collaborators thanks to what became a pretty big movement, and with help from the city of Detroit, the Kercheval-Alta intersection got partially reopened. Partially. It's still controversial. Fast forward to last year, 2020. Following the murder of George Floyd, has happened all over many Grosse Pointers. We're awakening to the ongoing massive injustice faced by people of color. I like the term woke, actually. Even though I wasn't able to attend, Bianca Garcia, who was 20 years old at the time, was an organizer of a march that went down Alta Road. One of its demands was to take down the walls and barriers. Recognizing that we were soulmates, Greg and Bianca and I connected. Identifying ourselves as representing 3 generations of Grosse Pointers, we published an op-ed in British Detroit magazine. It was titled, "Tear Down the Walls Between the Grosse Pointes and Detroit." Since then, we've become a team. We published other op-eds, newspaper ads, participated in interviews and podcasts. What makes it even better is we're part of a growing movement all over the suburbs. White people are taking a long, hard look at unlearning white supremacy and dismantling the structures of inequality. Sure, we're getting pushback, including hate mail. Lots of people have trouble imagining any other way of life is even possible. That's not surprising. For 28 generations, white people have been trained to think that if anything gets better for Black people or any people of color, it will get worse for whites. That's ridiculous. Still, 74 million of those white people voted for Donald Trump. That's depressing for sure. But 81 million voted against him. By my reckoning, that's the first time in the whole history of colonialism that we have had a little bit of a lead. I think the 74 million are on the wrong side of history. They're like the people who resisted the right to vote for women, supported prohibition, opposed gay marriage, hated mandatory seatbelt laws. They ferociously fought to preserve Jim Crow segregation until they didn't. As my friend Reverend Nelson Johnson says, a dying mule kicks the hardest. You know that moral arc of justice Dr. King talked about? It's more bendable now than it has been any time in my life. And bending it toward justice is what me, Greg, Bianca, and a whole lot of other people are working to do. Thanks to a terrific organization called WeGP, there are more than 500 people in the Grosse Pointes who have Black Lives Matter signs in their front yards. Okay, the signs don't change anything by themselves, but they represent attitudes and policies that are changing. Just a few weeks ago, Grosse Pointe Park got its first Black city council member. More and more people are joining anti-racist organizations. The power structure doesn't automatically get whatever it wants with no opposition like it used to. That KKK sign next door to Jadana is gone, at least for now. The times, they are changing. Oh, about that Grosse Pointe 3 Antifa label. The word Antifa has become a catch-all phrase used by Fox News. It's intended to scare white people into hating on white people who are not going along with the white power agenda. Literally, it stands for anti-fascist, Antifa. Get it? When you hear the word, you're supposed to think about violence and vandalism committed by privileged young white people. I don't know anyone who's in it, and the idea it would have a chapter in Grosse Pointe is hilarious. When a Republican Grosse Pointe white lady named Monica Palmer was trying to get people to believe that somehow Joe Biden stole the election in Detroit, she complained she was getting harassed by the Grosse Pointe chapter of Antifa. That got funny fast. Just Google Grosse Pointe Antifa and see for yourself. If making fun of yourself isn't a step on the path to wokeness, we thought, we don't know what is. So me and Bianca and Greg jumped on the bandwagon. We've been calling ourselves the Grosse Pointe Antifa 3 ever since. Unfortunately, our pink and green polo shirts with our Grosse Pointe Antifa 3 logo didn't get done in time for tonight's show, or I'd be wearing it. But I think you get the idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you so much. Nothing like the truth and a little history. Great story. Okay, I'm going to take you to our final storyteller. Told you we brought out the big guns tonight. Our next storyteller, I asked the question, what is your greatest source of pride? And he answered, my greatest source of pride is when my children show me they understand what I've been trying to teach them. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Maxie Jones.
I remember the very first time I ever heard of a Black person running for president. It was 1972, and her name was Shirley Chisholm. And I remember when my father saw that, his reaction was, shit, she ain't gonna win. I don't know why she's wasting her time. I ain't wasting my vote on her. Then, in 1984, Jesse Jackson ran for president. And my father said the same thing. Look at that. There's another one. I ain't wasting my vote on him either. Shit. And then he turned to me and said, listen, you are never going to see a Black president, not in your lifetime. In 2004, Reverend Al Sharpton ran for president. And my father had the same reaction. Shit. Why they keep doing this? Don't they see? Ain't nothing gonna change. Nothing's gonna change. Now, my father had completely lost hope in there ever being a Black president or things being better for Black folks. But I had a little hope. I was hoping that one day there would be a Black president, and that when that day comes, that they would make things better for Black folks. In 2007, my father passed away. And it was right after he passed away that I started hearing about this senator from Illinois named Barack Obama, who was throwing his name in the hat for president of the United States. And I could hear my father saying, Shit, he ain't gonna win. Don't waste your vote on him. And to a certain degree, his prejudice spilled over on me. And I was like, yeah, he's black. He ain't gonna win no presidency. I ain't wasting my vote. But as the election drew nearer, I started to notice that it was more than just black folks who were getting excited about Obama. I heard white people talking about his great political platform and how he was going to be such a breath of fresh air. And I thought to myself, maybe this guy can get my vote. And prior to that, I had been all team Hillary, and I was starting to change. On election day 2008, I lived in Harlem, New York, and I had to be to work 8 o'clock that morning. I heard the polls opened up at 6. So I got up really early because I wanted to be the first one in line so I could get my vote in and get to work. I got there at 6 o'clock and the line was long already. People had been there for hours waiting to vote, to cast their vote for a black president. And they weren't just standing in line like any other time you go to vote. It was like a party. People were festive. Everybody was celebrating. Everybody was talking to each other like they knew each other for years. When I walked in, they were like, hi. One guy had his children with him, and he said, I got my kids here because I want them to witness history. And I remember there was another lady who said, I normally don't really care about who's the president, so I don't bother voting. But I had to come out here and vote today. And once the polls opened, I must have stood in line about an hour and 15 minutes. And I cast my vote, and I was on my way to work. And then I got to work, and I remember one of my coworkers was like, can you just imagine? Can you imagine a black president? We're going to have a black president. And then someone else said, we're going to have somebody who understands us. And by the time I got home from work that day, I was hopeful. As a matter of fact, I was so hopeful. See, normally my thing is I just cast my vote and go about my business and I don't worry about what happens. But this time I got home, I had to watch the coverage. I had to turn on the TV and watch the coverage. I got home, I changed into my sweats that I wear around the house all the time, and I sat down and I was flicking the channels, watching all the coverage. Next thing I knew, I fell asleep. And I woke up to sounds of, yes, we can, on my TV. And I looked, and they were showing this huge crowd in Washington, D.C. Then they would show this huge crowd in Chicago. Then they showed a huge crowd in Harlem. And I said, Harlem? Where in Harlem? Because you see, right outside of my apartment, there was a Barack Obama campaign headquarters. So I said, are they right outside? So I threw on a leather jacket and I went outside to look, and nobody was out there. But then when I turned and I looked toward 125th Street, I saw this bright light. So I said, let me go check and see if that's what it is. So I started walking in that direction. And as I got closer, I kept hearing, yes, we can. Yes, we can. And I just went closer and closer. And when I got there, I saw this massive crowd. And there was a big tractor trailer there with a stage. And celebrities were taking turns on stage addressing the crowd. And there was this big jumbotron. And it must have had like MSNBC up there, and they were showing up-to-the-minute coverage of the election. And every time they showed Barack Obama winning in another state, the crowd would yell, yes, we can! Yes, we can! The police were trying to control the traffic on 125th Street, but it was impossible. I ran into one of my neighbors who lived in my building. She ran up to me, Maxie, can you believe it? I think we're going to have a black president. We're going to have a black president. And I looked at my neighbor and I thought, did I leave my door unlocked? Because I did not remember locking my apartment door. So I said, oh, shoot, I better get back. I started heading back to my apartment. And as soon as I turned to walk, the crowd erupted. And I looked up and the Jumbotron said, Barack Obama elected 44th President of the United States. Just then, some strange guy just grabbed me and hugged me. And he was hugging me and shaking me. He was like, we did it, we did it, we did it, we did it. And then somebody else grabbed me and hugged me. And next thing I knew, I had hugged about 50 strangers. And after a while, the feeling just started to get to me because I thought about my father. So I stepped outside the crowd and I took a moment by myself and I said, well, Dad, you were right. It didn't happen in your lifetime, but I'm glad it happened in mine. And right after that, my phone rang. It was my friend Kelly. She's like, Maxie, where are you? Where are you? Stay there. I'm coming. And she came and met me, and we headed to the Lenox Lounge to have a drink. And as we were walking across 125th Street, we passed by a Lenox Avenue subway station, and droves of people were coming up the stairs from the subway station, as if in that moment, Harlem was the place to be because we had a black president. And as people were coming up the stairs, they would just come up the stairs and just hug you. Everybody was just hugging each other, and I hugged about 50 more people. And Kelly said, come on, Maxie, stop hugging people. Let's go. Because she wanted a drink. And we got to the Lenox Lounge, and as soon as I stepped in the door, I had to push my way in the door. And as soon as I stepped in the door, the bouncer pushed me in and slammed the door behind me. And he said, that's it. We're at capacity. And I stood there and I looked around. And everyone in Lenox Lounge was dressed formally. People had on tuxedos and bow ties, men. And the ladies had on sequin evening gowns. And I was standing there at the door with my pajama sweats and a leather jacket. And we partied all night long. And when it was over, I stepped out onto Lenox Avenue. The sun was coming up. The street was still crowded with revelers. And I looked down the street and I saw a Dixieland band coming in my direction. And I looked, I said, oh shit, is that a Dixieland band? And when it passed by me, I said, oh, it is a Dixieland band. Yep, this was all a dream. And I started walking back to my apartment. And I stopped at the bodega and picked up a newspaper, tucked it under my arm, went back to my apartment. And when I got there, sure enough, the door was still unlocked. The TV was still on the same channel, and the lights were still on. Everything was exactly as I had left it. I took the newspaper, put it on the coffee table, and the headline said, change has come. And I said, yep, it has. Dad, maybe this time you were wrong. Now, 2 years after that, in 2010, I became a father for the first time. And then 2 years after that, I had my second son. And just like that, I went from having my father saying, you'll never see a black president in your lifetime, to having two sons who only knew life with a black president. My sons went to preschool, kindergarten, and elementary school. And they learned all about President Barack Obama. And they came home talking about President Barack Obama and Black Pride and all that stuff. Next thing I know, he was out of office. And someone asked me, well, Maxie, what do you think about Obama's presidency? And I said, I think my father was right. Here it is, we done had a black president, and ain't nothing changed. Everything's still the same. And my son asked me, well, Daddy, why are you so hard on him? And I said, because you think that if you have a black man in the White House, that he would address the issues related to black people. But I was wrong. You see, I learned after the murder of George Floyd, and after all the progress that was made in the Black Lives Matter movement, that kind of change doesn't happen in the White House. It happens on the street. It happens with the people, no matter who was in the White House. Because the Black Lives Matter movement gained the most ground with Donald Trump in office. My sons also happened to experience history in that they got to see Kamala Harris become not only the first female vice president, but the first African-American vice president. On January 6th of this year, I was sitting here watching the insurrection at the Capitol building. And my son came down and he said, Daddy, what are you watching? And I said, I'm watching these people at the Capitol building. He said, well, what are they doing? And I was kind of happy to say to him, you know, son, things are changing. Now, many, many more people understand why Black Lives Matter than ever before. Donald Trump is out of office, and we actually have a Black female in the White House. I said, so things are changing. And those people, they are very, very, very unhappy. It's kind of like, as Frank Joyce said earlier, that a dying mule kicks the hardest. And my son said to me, well, Daddy, aren't those people going to get in a lot of trouble for that? And I looked at my son and I said, son, shitty, that hasn't changed. And you know what? It probably ain't going to change in your lifetime. Thank you.
Well, once again, Maxie, you've outdone yourself. Excellent story. Wonderful, wonderful. And in the words of Maxie Jones, shit, we gave you stories this evening. Absolutely wonderful, everyone. Let me tell you now, we're not working in the month of March. Our next storytelling event will be April 16, and the theme will be Ain't I a Woman? Should be quite interesting. Ain't I a Woman? April 16, mark your calendar, okay? Now, I would also like to, once again, thank the City of Southfield Parks and Recreation for their third year invite. It's always wonderful to help you celebrate Black History Month. Thank you, thank you. And WC3D for your support, your continuous support. Thank you, thank you, and thank you. If it were not for you, we'd be missing out. Now I'd like to bring everybody back because it's time to say farewell and to hang out for those that want to keep hanging out with us for a little while. Dr. Carolyn Carter, come back. Dwight Stackhouse, front and center. Frank Joyce, Maxie Jones, Kym Brady. I want to thank everybody for your stories, for your talent. You did an outstanding job this evening, and I'm sure the City of Southfield appreciate you, and maybe they'll call us back again next year. It's been fun. I think we can wrap this up and head into the after party. Thank you, everybody. The chat room has been awesome tonight. Your stories were awesome. You just blew the chat room up. They've loved everything that you had to say this evening. We learned a lot, and they appreciate that. They appreciate you. Thank you, storytellers.